Finkelstein. But Tony, now first, please.
Thank you, Tina. Could I ask you to enable the sharing, because I've got one or two things I wish to share. Thank you, comrades. It's most apposite that Tina starts off with the McCarthy era 70 years ago, because that is what we have been going through, and that is what we are going through. 70 years ago, if you didn't like someone, if they were a dissident, they didn't have to be a socialist even, you used the term communist. That was a general term of abuse for someone you didn't like. Today, the term is anti-Semite. If you don't like someone, then they're an anti-Semite. And so you have the phenomena of non-Jewish racists, people who supported the hostile environment policy, people who have supported every immigration regulation and restriction, accusing people who are Jewish of being anti-Semitic. That is the absurdity that we have. Now, we formed this group about 2 months ago, and the reason why we did it was simple. During the Labour leadership campaign, the Board of Deputies, which represents a minority of the most racist and reactionary Jews in this country, issued what they call the 10 Pledges, which I call the 10 Commandments. Now, if anyone is aware of the 10 Commandments, the 5th commandment is, thou shalt love, honour and obey thy parents. However, they've redrafted it. It's now anyone who goes on a platform, who shares a platform with anyone who's been expelled or suspended. Bear in mind, in English law, employment law, which I practiced, suspension is a neutral act. You're neither guilty or not guilty. Anyone who shares a platform even with someone who's been expelled under the Labour Party procedures will themselves be suspended. And this was adopted by Keir Starmer. And there was a meeting, a public meeting organised by Don't Leave Organise, in which Jackie Walker and myself spoke from the audience of a Zoom meeting. And there were calls immediately from the Jewish Chronicle and the Board of Deputies to suspend Diane Abbott and Bel Ribeiro Addy, who happened to be speaking at that meeting. They never spoke to us, they never conversed with us, but nonetheless, through guilt by association, they were guilty of anti-Semitism, of course. And Starmer reprimanded them. And then later, of course, he dismissed from the cabinet Rebecca Long-Bailey because she'd repeated what he called an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, namely that the Israeli police train American police in a variety of techniques, including the neck on the knee on the neck. Well, we have massive photographic evidence that is the case. There is no disputing that this is true. But then part of the anti-Semitism witch hunt has been that something can be true, but it also can be anti-Semitic. And the main point I want to make today is that the anti-Semitism witch hunt that we've seen for the last 5 years has absolutely nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the excuse, it is the pretext, it's not the reason. And we see this quite clearly with Keir Starmer, because not having dismissed Rebecca Long-Bailey, you would have thought he'd dispatch Rachel Reeves, one of the most obnoxious right-wing members of the shadow cabinet, someone who says that Labour does not represent claimants, because she tweeted a message of support for a statue by Nancy Astor, and I'll show it you. Here it is. If I can get it, bring it up if everyone can see that. Nancy Astor, apart from being the first Conservative MP, was also a supporter of the Nazis. This is just one of her quotes. She was a member of the Cliveden set, a pro-Nazi group of Tories, and she said, Hitler will have to do more. She said this to the American ambassador, Senator Joseph Kennedy. Hitler will have to do more than give a rough time to the killers of Christ. That in itself, of course, is an anti-Semitic reference, the idea that Jews are the killers of Christ, to justify the UK and US entering the war. And you see at the top, Rachel Reeves paying tribute to this woman. Keir Starmer simply did not want to know when he was questioned at Labour's National Executive Committee over that. Likewise, Stephen Reid, another member of the shadow cabinet, He tweeted something about Richard Desmond being a puppet master, which is again another anti-Semitic trope about Jews pulling the strings from behind the scenes. It's an infamous stereotype. Once again, Keir Starmer was completely unconcerned about it. So I think we can draw the conclusion, not only the conclusion from what Keir Starmer has said, but actually from the leaked Labour report itself. One of the very clear things to me about that report is that people like Christopher Crooks, who were genuine Holocaust deniers, the compliance unit really did not want to know. They were not concerned with genuine anti-Semites. What they were concerned with was anti-Zionists, who they could portray as anti-Semites. And I think that is really important to understand. And I have to say, the tragedy, and it is a tragedy, of this whole affair is that Jeremy Corbyn and those around him did not understand or did not perceive that the anti-Semitism witch hunt was not directed at me. It wasn't directed at Jackie or Chris or anyone else. We were collateral damage. The main target was Jeremy Corbyn himself. So there was nothing Corbyn could have done, however much he tried, which could have evaded this, apart from standing up to the witch hunters and calling out the weaponization of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And I read the leaked report. I did a long summary of it myself on my blog. And here it is. I mean, I just want to show. I just want to show you this, and it startled me. I was reading through it, and it said, there's a number of such references. Jeremy Corbyn himself. Can everyone see this?
No, it's not come through, Tony.
It's not come through yet. Can someone tell me when it has?
It's not. Your share doesn't work. You're not sharing.
Oh, right. Okay. Let me share.
Please do.
Yes, sorry. Right. Can everyone see that now?
Nope.
There.
I can't see your screen.
No, you have to press at the bottom of your screen. Share.
Yeah, I've done it. Right, is that there?
No. Sorry, Tony's not working.
Is that up now or not?
No.
Oh, yes, something's happening now.
Okay, now it's coming.
Okay, this is the leaked Labour report, page 306. And it says, Jeremy Corbyn himself and members of his staff team requested to GLU that particular anti-Semitism cases be dealt with. In 2017, Lotto, that's the leader of the opposition staff, chased for action on high-profile anti-Semitism cases. Ken Livingstone, Tony Greenstein, Jackie Walker and Marc Wadsworth, stressing that these cases were of great concern to Jewish stakeholders, whoever they are, and that resolving them was essential to, quote, rebuilding trust between the Labour Party and the Jewish community. Well, comrades, Jackie Walker, Marc Wadsworth and myself were expelled. Ken Livingstone was forced out. Sorry, Chris Williamson was also, in essence, forced out. Was trust rebuilt? No, of course it wasn't. The Board of Deputies and the Zionists took what Corbyn had gave them and then asked for more and for more, because the real thing they wanted was the head of Jeremy Corbyn. And if I can just go back, because I didn't realise I wasn't sharing at the time, if I can just bring up that, since people obviously didn't see it, the image of Rachel Reeves. As I say, she's a senior member of the Labour cabinet. Can everyone see that now? Sorry. Yeah. There it is. That's her tweet. She hasn't deleted it. It's still there. Hitler will have to do more than give a rough time to the killers of Christ, etc. Yeah. Clearly, she was not only an anti-Semite, but a supporter of Hitler, in essence. And yet, Starmer has done nothing about it. So I think it's quite clear, what with his overtures to the Labour Friends of Israel, his promise that he will go to visit Israel and so on, that this is not about anti-Semitism. This witch hunt is not about anti-Semitism. Today, and I've seen the papers of many people who've been expelled and suspended, it's about criticism of Israel, as we always said it was. And I have to say, and I'll close on this, one of the most stupid things about this affair, and unfortunately, again, Jeremy Corbyn repeated it, was if you deny you're an anti-Semite, that is proof that you are anti-Semitic. I have to say, this is the logic of the Salem witch trials. It was those who denied that they were witches who were hanged. No one who admitted to being a witch was hanged. They got off with imprisonment or what have you. So we see this nefarious logic being used. It's almost as if you were accused in court of a crime, if you deny that crime, then that is proof of the crime. That is really fascist logic, nothing less. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope it's a great meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. Denialism is certainly a new charge that's shown up in this period, and there are a few people being suspended and expelled at the moment for denialism, especially the Wavertree 4. That's the whole charge of all of these 4 individuals suspended.
Absurd, isn't it?
The next speaker is Jackie Walker, a person who's been smeared and her case extended and deliberately delayed in order to get rid of easier cases like that of Tony first, as the leaked report has shown. She was smeared as an anti-Semite and in addition had plenty of racist and sexist abuse on top of it. But she's not giving up, which is fantastic. Continues to speak out. Hello, Becky.
Hi, hello. First of all, I'd like to say, of course, it hasn't just been abuse, it's been threats against my life, and, quite violent threats against me. And one thing that has helped me through this is something about the history, not just the history of myself as a Black woman of Jewish descent, but of a Jewish father and a Caribbean woman of Jewish descent who were themselves targeted by McCarthyism at the time in America because they were both involved in the civil rights movement. And so rather than speak generally, I think, about what has happened during this time, I think my focus is going to be more about this issue of freedom of speech, because I think this is absolutely critical, and critical to us as socialists. Because what we're going through, yes, it's a reign of terror, yes, it's a witch hunt, but what it does is it misshapes all conversations on all racisms, and in particular it disadvantages the most oppressed minorities, as well as undermining the very structure of democracy, which is freedom of speech. We don't have freedom of speech. People cannot make democratic decisions. And whatever we think of parliamentary democracy, whatever the limitations of it, it is so much more limited when we are with a media that continually lies and misshapes public opinion. And we've seen this happen really recently, in fact, with the Black Lives Matter debate, where, for example, the recent comments of a Black rapper have been used to undermine and denigrate both Black Lives Matter and Black people. I mean, it has been astonishing what's gone on. Some of you may know there has been a boycott, a so-called boycott of the great and good from Twitter. I have to tell you, Twitter has never been so good. The level of abuse has just gone down since a number of well-known, what I would say, reactionary voices and racist voices have decided to boycott because of what this rapper said. Because however bad what he said was, there's no doubt, what he said was absolutely reprehensible. It's astonishing that it's taken that rather than the level of anti-Black and anti-Muslim racism that is extolled on social media, that these people haven't felt moved to actually speak out about. And the other thing I want to speak about is how we shift opinion as socialists, as people who speak about issues within this democratic process. Because I, like everybody, has made mistakes. There's not one person on this platform or at all anywhere that doesn't ever make any mistakes. And it's How we develop ideas is to practice and to speak and enter into a dialogue and then change when others, you know, correct us, or we correct ourselves through actually realizing that our thoughts are actually not quite spoken about. We haven't spoken our thoughts in quite the right way. And we're now into a system where not any misspeech, but only, as Tony pointed out, only particular misspeaking or mistakes are made enough not just to castigate people, but to actually attempt to destroy people, both politically and personally. And I say personally, because, you know, the amount of people who are suffering real mental illness because of what has gone on and real physical illness cannot be exaggerated. What we need to do is to be able to defend a robust dialogue that can go on about issues, not just issues of race, but issues of poverty, issues of war, issues of state terrorism. Because as soon as they limit and are limiting freedom of speech, for example, to discuss issues to do with Israel, to discuss issues to do with race, then what happens is that that pulls the whole conversation to the right. So the purpose of this is actually not just about Israel. It's about the right taking hold of the dialogue, taking hold of the vocabulary of emancipation and claiming it for themselves. And we have to resist it, whatever the cost. We have to resist it. And just to end on this issue, because this is also very current at the moment, we see this happening in particular in the court system. Now, one thing I know is that my case would have been thrown out of any judicial in this country. It would have just been thrown out with lack of evidence, with the lies that were told about me, with the smears that were then accepted by the Labour Party as truth. The fact that they chose to use a so-called specialist, who is a specialist of nothing in particular, in fact, from this country, and rejected to take hold in terms of, in particular, the report, the actual work and comments by Professor Lewis Gordon from America, who is actually the leading world specialist on the intersection between Blackness and Judaism. And they chose not to actually take that on. But what we see is the court system now being used by the rich and powerful in terms of a pattern of libel and damages. Because what they know is that unless you're willing to risk your house, you're not going to fight it. And it has become a tool to smash freedom of speech. And until we actually get into court, we have the funds and we have the case to push back into court. This is actually a problem for us. And it is to the shame of the judicial system that the way the libel rules works for the rich and the privileged. And I only hope, looking at how much the crowdfunding for Jeremy Corbyn has run, that if he doesn't use that money for himself, that money will be used. That money will be used in court, if not to defend him, but to defend the movement that has stood in solidarity with him from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Bit of a shame he didn't defend us when we had to go to court, or some of us, but that's a different matter, I guess. Next person to speak, and who actually did try to sue the party, is Marc Wadsworth. one of the most ridiculous cases. I think his expulsion is perhaps on the weakest of all the expulsions that we've seen. Okay, hello, Marc.
Thank you very much, Comrade Tina. My encounter with a pro-Israeli government zealot at the launch of a Labour report into anti-Semitism and racism in June 2016 got me expelled from the party, despite my record as a lifelong anti-racist campaigner. And you've heard from Comrade Tony how Black party members and Jewish party members have been targeted. It made headlines, my case. I suffered trial by media, most of whom didn't contact me for my side of the story, which is a breach of journalistic good practice. It counted for nothing I set up the Anti-Racist Alliance in 1991 to oppose racists and fascists and help the parents of murdered Black teenager Stephen Lawrence set up their campaign for justice 2 years later. Through my contacts, I was able to introduce Doreen and Neville Lawrence to Nobel Prize winners Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. Censorship is done by commission and omission. My campaigning was completely ignored by the Labour Party and the mainstream media journalists who wrote about my case. Yet I vividly remember being on the Isle of Dogs in London's East End, opposing the fascist British National Party when they got their first councillor elected. And on the picket line outside the Sunday Times, after it had published Hitler apologist David Irving's version of Goebbels' diaries. On both occasions, side by side with Jewish comrades. In fact, Ali G, Sacha Baron Cohen, as a young Jewish activist, was one of them. Eminent Jewish lawyer Jeffrey Byman drafted a racial harassment bill for the Anti-Racist Alliance at my request. It became law with the help of Jewish Tory MPs of Ivan Lawrence. We used to work with the Board of Deputies of British Jews, Tony, of which Ivan Lawrence was a member, and Polit Zion, which is now the Jewish Labour movement. Some people said I was soft on Zionism. How June 2016 changed that. I will robustly set out my case against Zionism and in support of the Palestinians in the new edition of my book, Comrade Sack, coming out in September. My Labour investigating officer, Dan Hogan, one of the recipients, well, he actually was tasked with concocting the case against me, was one of the recipients of that six-figure bung last week. What a disgrace that those saboteurs were actually rewarded for their treachery. In fact, my book publisher, who's been a lifelong Labour Party member, resigned his membership of the party just last week in disgust. And I understand that thousands of others have also left the party. My Labour case was just a kangaroo court, really. And the leaked report has Hogan saying this: I am now hearing from witnesses who we need for the hearing, my disciplinary, that they are growing increasingly disillusioned by this process and the time it is taking. These are also senior stakeholders in Labour's Jewish community, and in the context of recent negative and inaccurate media reports on how the party treats cases of anti-Semitism, we cannot afford to be seen to dither on a case of as much symbolic importance as Marc Wadsworth's. As you know, whenever there is a story about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, Marc Wadsworth is held up as a leading example. This case is a priority. There was then the travesty of a BBC Panorama programme called Is the Labour Party Anti-Semitic? It was a biased hatchet job on the Jeremy Corbyn-led party and made me ashamed to be a journalist, and an ex-BBC one at that. Editorial control might as well have been handed over to the viciously anti-Corbyn Jewish Labour movement, whose members were the programme's main interviewees. For the interviewees read attack dogs. It just shows how corrupt is the BBC complaint system. I know, I've used it. And the Ofcom regulator, both of which rejected a torrent of objections from the Labour Party and the public. I used to be the co-chair of the National Union of Journalists Ethics Council. In my view, the Panorama programme breached clauses 1, 2, 3 and 4 of the union's Code of Conduct that explicitly state a journalist at all times upholds and defends the principles of media freedom, the right of freedom of expression and the right of the public to be informed, strives to ensure that information disseminated is honest, conveyed accurately and fairly. Journalists need to be brave. Tariq, comrade, I remember as a young reporter doing a freelance shift at the Daily Mirror in 1981 when you tried to join the Hornsey Labour Party. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn proposed the motion to have you accepted into membership. News bosses at the Daily Mirror crowded around my desk and asked me as a black face in the office, the only black face in the office, to write a knocking feature about you, which I refused to do. And therefore, no story from me with my name on it appeared. I think that I ruined my chances of ever getting a job on the paper as a result of that, but it was well worth doing. In fact, Harold Wilson's ex-press chief, Joe Haynes, was one of those news executives trying to bully me. Most galling is the now ex-Labour MP that got me chucked out of the party. She lost her seat at the last election, which was some poetic justice, was exposed as a liar about the volume of abuse she had received. She's now got a top job at, wait for it, Index on Censorship. Well, David Miller exposed the lies that she made about the volume of abuse. In fact, black MP Diane Abbott has received more abuse many times fold than any other MP. And yet I don't see the party leadership of Keir Starmer sticking up for her, speaking out. He's too busy in his office in a photo call doing a stomach churning taking of the knee with Angela Rayner whilst calling Black Lives Matter a moment rather than a movement. I have this to say for all of those who have been traduced, vilified, suspended and expelled by the witch hunters. We will be vindicated by history, of which journalism is just the first draft. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Sorry about the chat there. We had a couple of trolls posting nasty things, but they're gone now. We're used to it, aren't we? So it's not like the first time we've been called names. The leaked report also has, of course, shown the many mistakes made by the Jeremy Corbyn leadership, Corbyn and his allies. And I think this has also become very clear in the case of Chris Williamson's expulsion, well, his suspension, so you weren't expelled, his suspension, when the report quotes at length and very proudly, I think, Jenny Formby explaining why he should be suspended. None of what he said, she says, is by itself, none of the things are a problem, but you add them all up and they become a pattern of behavior, which does remind me about the striking as like a bit like the 3 strikes out policy in the US, where you can go to prison for 30 years for stealing a lipstick because it's a pattern of behavior. We're very proud to have Chris with us, who was the only MP, which is shameful, the only MP who would stand with people who've been accused of being anti-Semites, who've been expelled, who've been smeared, etc. None of the Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs have done anything like it since, or not at the time either. So we're very pleased to welcome Chris Williamson.
Thanks very much indeed, Tina, for that introduction. And I wanted to start really by saying that what we're seeing is, and have seen for some time now, a concerted effort to close down solidarity. And indeed, I remember people on the left of the party, or claim to be on the left of the party, for example, saying to me, steer clear of Jackie Walker, don't get involved with Marc Wadsworth's case. And I absolutely refuse to do that, because in my opinion, if you have a platform, it's incumbent upon you then to use that platform to stand up for what's right, and to certainly express solidarity with people who, as Mark has just said, being absolutely despicably traduced. And I was not prepared to do that. And I went and gave evidence for Marc. And he referred to his hearing, the Labour Party hearing, the National Constitutional Committee, as a kangaroo court. It absolutely was. They had no case against him whatsoever. And yet it didn't matter what we said. There was a predetermined decision. It went on for 2 days. God knows how they managed to spin it out for that long. I don't know if they're on expenses or something. But quite clearly, when you look at the evidence that they had before them, of Marc's intervention at the press conference into the Chakrabarti review into anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, there was literally no case against him. But look, this whole issue about chilling free speech extends well beyond that, of course. And Jeremy made a fatal error, in my opinion, Jeremy Corbyn, when he tried to appease the unappeasable. He treated them as people who were acting in good faith, but the truth is they were bad faith actors. And as Tony and indeed Marc and Jackie, I think, have made the point that they weren't interested in reality about anti-Semitism. The real deal was to stop a socialist getting into number 10, but more specifically, somebody in Jeremy Corbyn who was committed to a genuine ethical foreign policy. A foreign policy that would have extended support to the Palestinian people. And now we have the absurd spectacle of right-wing commentators complaining about this so-called culture, this so-called cancel culture. But let's remember where the cancel culture started. The origins of the cancel culture can be traced right back to the State of Israel and to the Zionist lobby on both sides of the Atlantic. Very, very powerful and influential lobbies. Over in the States, we have Campus Watch, the Canary Mission, so-called honest reporting, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, and the so-called Anti-Defamation League. And then in this country, we've got the Board of Deputies, which have already been mentioned, the right-wing pro-Zionist newspaper, if you can call it that, the Jewish Chronicle and others, have been actively working to close down free speech as far as it extends to Palestine and support for the Palestinian people. And their aim is to, and it's been effective, is to terrify editors, to terrify academics, to frighten activists, and even judges and lawyers have been intimidated into accepting Zionism and supporting the objectives of the State of Israel. And I saw that terror, that fear at first hand from MPs. Yeah. Because when I was initially suspended, there was literally no public support from my comrades in the Socialist Campaign Group, even though I was probably the most active member of the campaign group. And then when I was reinstated in the middle of last year, there was an outpouring of opposition, hysterical media outbursts. And over 100 MPs signed a motion calling for the decision to reinstate me to be overturned. And I then explicitly asked the Socialist Campaign Group for a collective statement of solidarity. I said to them, look, we're all socialists, aren't we? We all believe an injury to one is an injury to all. We all believe in collective solidarity. And I'm afraid to say it was not forthcoming. I didn't actually ask the entirety of the Socialist Campaign Group. I only asked 10 of the what I felt were the strongest members of that group. And I got a response back from one of them saying, what can 10 MPs do against 100, Chris? And it was very, very sad to see. And I can only put it down to the fact that people were very fearful about the implications. They could see how I'd been demonized. They could see what had happened to Ken Livingstone, what had happened to Jackie Walker, Tony Greenstein, Marc Wadsworth, and others, and were too frightened to speak out. And I just think that is unacceptable state of affairs, because as I've already said, when you have a platform, it's really important that you use it. But look, we are fighting back now. As Mick McCarthy once said, the great National Union of Mine Workers trade union leader, he said, they'll stop chasing you when you stop running. And we are going to stop running. I've never run in the first place, but we are now building a movement and we are fighting back. We won't be cancelled and we won't be cowed by this campaign of intimidation. There's literally nothing, frankly, that the haters can do to stop us now. We're going to build this movement, and our job, in my opinion, is to embark on our cancel culture of our own. and that is to cancel the influence of the racist Zionist ideology on public life in this country, and actually stand up proud for the Palestinian people, and stand up proud against the military-industrial complex, and stand up proud for a comprehensive, ethical foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Chris. You stayed well under your time. Thank you. I think the fighting back is hugely important. We're seeing thousands of people currently leaving the Labour Party. We can debate, we have different views on that issue, on that panel, should we stay or should we go? I think if we stay, we fight for sure. There's no point staying and keeping quiet and accepting that we cannot be in a room in an online meeting with Jackie Walker or Tony Greenstein, unless we're prepared to say that. I think there's a very little point in staying in the Labour Party. But there's also Labour Left Alliance, Labour Against the Witch Hunt, Chris Williamson's resistance movement. I think there are things comrades should join. The worst thing that could happen is now the hundreds of thousands who joined the Labour Party simply dropping out into atomization and becoming disorganized, which would be a huge problem. The next speaker is David Miller, who's been on the receiving end as well as so many of us, and who I believe was suspended, was then reinstated, but then again I think left the Labour Party recently. Hello, David.
Good evening. Yeah, it's slightly longer than that. So I was suspended, then reinstated, then I had a complaint taken against me, which was found to be not founded, and then I was suspended, and then I resigned. So it was a little bit longer. But yeah, this is happened to a lot of people, and it will happen to a lot more. The fact that Brighton and Hove Council has now lost its Labour majority to the Greens on the basis that 3 councillors have been suspended by the party is another extraordinary effect of the ongoing witch hunt. The party is quite prepared to lose councils on the basis of suspending people for what will turn out to be, I am sure, transparently false allegations. And I make that kind of statement in full cognizance of Jenny Formby's position inside the party. If you read in the leaked report, her statement on page 586, she says, making generalized blanket statements that tarnish all allegations of anti-Semitism as smears, I'm sure no one's done that, or as politically motivated, is deeply unhelpful to the cause of eradicating anti-Semitism where it does exist within the movement. Such statements divide and polarize people who should be brought together in constructive dialogue. And I think that's a real indication of the problematic way in which the Corbyn-led party under Jenny Formby, when she took over as General Secretary, handled the anti-Semitism issue. And that was, to put it very briefly, that they adopted the witch hunt. They continued to push forward the witch hunt inside the party. Rather than taking an evidence-based approach, they decided that what was going on here was people who had genuine grievances, perhaps mistaken, but genuine grievances about members of the party, and we should engage them in constructive dialogue. And of course, there is no constructive dialogue with the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement isn't interested in dialogue, in truth, in finding out how best to tackle anti-Semitism. And that is a fundamental mistake and a fundamental error for the Labour Party, for someone like Jenny to make, someone who has a long, proud history of Palestine solidarity activism. I think that in the end, that's where we've got to. We've got to the position where under Corbyn, under Jenny Formby, the leadership of the party was at the forefront of taking forward the witch hunt. So it wasn't just a question of the Zionist movement, of the trolls, of the JLM, of Labour Against Anti-Semitism, and Nasher and all of that lot, backed, of course, by the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel. It wasn't just a question of them, it was that it had been taken into the consciousness, the very consciousness of the leadership of the Labour Party. And of course, you see in the Labour leaked report, if you've read through quite a lot of it, I haven't read all of it yet, but I have read some key bits. And there's a bit where they discuss the people that they took on to be in charge of anti-Semitism investigations, one of whom is a former member of the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, well-known faction. And the other one says in a long passage in the report, which he himself must have written, that he learnt about left anti-Semitism from reading a book by Dave Rich of the Community Security Trust, an organisation which has been at the forefront of pursuing the witch hunt, a group which is unable to distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which purposefully blurs together those two concepts in order to pursue the left. That's been its raison d'etre from the very beginning, since it was created in 1994, and indeed even before that, the previous organisations which became the Community Security Trust. So the idea that people like that should be engaged in constructive dialogue is a fantasy. These are people who must only be faced and defeated. They are supporters of Israel, of the racist policies of the Israeli government, and of course of the racist foundation of the Israeli state, founded, of course, as we all know, on ethnic cleansing and settler colonialism. So I think that perhaps, I mean, maybe I hadn't realised this, but maybe other comrades hadn't realised this. The rot had gone so far as this. But reading the leaked Labour report, one sees that it was Corbyn himself who went along with that, Jenny Formby, McDonnell, all of the leadership who went along with essentially a Zionist approach to dealing with anti-Semitism. And that's that. When I first sort of realised that, I was shocked, perhaps not that surprised, but shocked that they had gone so far, because these are people who all their lives, as Chris has said, in the campaign group had been involved in Palestine solidarity work. No doubt they still will be. But I think that was for me the key problem with which was brought out in the Labour anti-Semitism report. And where are we now? We're in a position which is way worse than when Jenny Formby was in charge, and will get much worse. There are proud Zionists in the leadership office of Keir Starmer. He has himself, of course, described himself in similar terms. And there will never be a possibility of engaging in proper Palestine solidarity work inside the Labour Party now, until or unless these people are removed from the party. And the prospect of that at present, I think everyone would agree with me, seems rather remote. So the question is what we do about this. And I don't want to, divide people. Of course, people have different views on this, but it seems to me clear that we cannot win this argument inside the party. And there is the need for movements, perhaps new parties outside the Labour Party, which need to be built. These are not easy matters. The history is not propitious. The way in which the left has fallen out with itself and amongst itself in the last 10 years since the Iraq war or so, it does not give great cause for confidence, but it's the only option, it seems to me. And I wanted to put that out there as what seems to me to be the only possibility. There is, of course, much we can do to engage in Palestine solidarity work, as many people are doing, but also we must, of course, engage the enemy in this, which is not just, of course, the British government and US imperialism, but the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement and the Israeli government are the enemy of the left, the enemy of world peace, and they must be directly targeted. And I know people say we must just engage in Palestine solidarity work. Yes, of course we must, but let's be clear, that's not enough. In order for the Palestinians to win, Zionism as a philosophy, as an idea, as an ideology, must be defeated. And that seems to me to be the clarity which the current historical moment gives us. I don't think I need to say much more than that. I'm happy to answer questions when they come around.
Brilliant. I think you made some very strong points on the nature of appeasement and its futility, and it doesn't work. I do wonder sometimes what strategy Corbyn and his allies had, if they thought once they're in number 10, that's when they stop trying to appease the right and fight back. It is a real question. I don't understand what their strategy is. I'm not sure they did. Okay, the next speaker is stalwart of the left, Tariq Ali. He's got a bit more time than the other speakers because he's more of a guest of the platform. So he could speak for about 10-15 minutes. Just quickly on the rest of the meeting, we had hoped to bring in some comrades from the floor, hopefully, if we have a bit of time. If you could put your question in the Q&A and indicate that you want to speak, and I might be able to bring in a few people before we can have a summing up from the main speakers again. So hello, Tariq.
I am very glad to be with all you comrades who I've defended on paper in writing since this wretched business started. I remember soon after the Labour leadership and the leader's office caved in effectively to a Zionist offensive, there was a public meeting at the Conway Hall where a number of us said that this was a huge error, that even its supposed justification, that it would keep them quiet till the election was over. No one said that in public, but that was behind it. Don't fight on this issue. They'll just be used against us. We can't win. We'll sort it out once the election is over. I remember saying this was a huge error. It was a strategic error. It was not the way in which the leadership had conducted itself previously. For instance, when in the middle of the first election campaign, where Labour came within a whisker of victory, when there were 2 terrorist attacks in Manchester and in London, Corbyn was under heavy pressure, including from some of his close colleagues, to just denounce the attacks and say nothing. But he insisted at that point in time, very intelligently, on saying that British foreign policy was ultimately to blame. Yep. And Theresa May said, "We will not let him forget these words." Then the Tories did their own polling and found out that 70% of the country agreed with Corbyn. We never heard any attack on him on this issue again. And in my opinion, though anti-Semitism is a very different issue, a similar line of attack should have been followed, saying very clearly, yes, there is anti-Semitism in society. Yes, there may be some in the Labour Party. There's certainly more in the right-wing parties. The Conservative Party, which Britain First members have been queuing up to join. But we're going to fight any attempt to stop us speaking on Palestine or being critical of Israel. And it is a complete slander and slur to say that the Labour leadership, Corbyn in particular, are either anti-Semitic or encourage anti-Semitic. I mean, a big fight could have been waged. We may not have won it, but it would have been a much better thing to do than caving in. After all, we didn't win anyway, did we? So the question is, I'm not going to go, I agree with what has been said, especially by everyone, really. Chris and David said what I said on most of these issues. So let's see how to deal with it now. First, this process that was started off to try and weaken the left, to weaken Corbyn, to prevent criticism of Israel too much, as Israel is planning a total occupation of Palestinian territories, made no secret of it, only token opposition so far from some of the EU countries. They will do nothing if it happens, in my opinion. So they're trying to clear the atmosphere so they can do anything. And what is a problem has been that in Europe as a whole, there is, I think, a majority, all the opinion polls have shown that, for some degree of self-determination for the Palestinians. This the Israelis have been trying to defeat and smash. And that is why what happened in Britain, in England in particular, but it has also affected Scotland, where the SNP's position on Palestine used to be pretty good. They haven't opened their mouths on this subject. On the islands in this part of the world, it's the Republic of Ireland alone which speaks up for the Palestinians and what has been going on there. Everyone else has been silenced. So what happens in the Labour Party now, to be perfectly frank to those of us who are not members, is not of great interest. The left has lost. It's been defeated. It is not going to come anywhere near to getting a leader as left-wing as Corbyn for the next half century. That is, if the United Kingdom exists by then. So it's no good pretending that that can be repeated. It's extremely unlikely. The right are not going to make the same mistakes again, which enabled the left to come in and score these victories in a situation where they had virtually nil support inside the Parliamentary Labour Party and were unable to create an organization which did more than electoral campaigning. Momentum could have been a powerful organization if it had been politicized, if it had been educated politically, if it had been taught what socialism was, why we agitate on Palestine, etc., etc. It wasn't done. So there is, in my opinion, been a huge defeat for the left. I give no advice on what people should do, where they want to be active, inside, outside the Labour Party, but they should understand what the reality is. Now, if you look, everyone agrees on this, that one of the principal reasons for the so-called anti-Semitism crisis, which is taking place here, and which, by the way, we've not mentioned this, but attempts by the French government to declare all anti-Zionist marches, anti-pro-BDS manifestations illegal has been rejected by the European Court. And this rejection, the first week after this rejection, I saw the largest pro-Palestinian demonstration in Paris that I have ever seen. So I think what is important is to, obviously we carry on the campaign, those of you who are involved in it, but the key thing is to try, at least attempt to defeat the Israeli state in terms of not keeping quiet about Palestine. This means all sorts of activity. It means mobilizing people again, because what is happening, I mean, it is painful to read reports. I honestly find it painful to read the reports coming from Palestine every day to me, from different cities, from Gaza, from Ramallah, from the peace movements, etc. It is horrific how the Palestinians are being treated by the Israeli government and its military. And the fact that this is all accepted without a single real voice speaking up in anger in the parliaments in Europe. Actually, I'm being a bit unfair. There have been some powerful speeches made by left-wing socialists in the Belgian parliament. Some very powerful pro-Palestinian speeches have been made. But by and large, what Norman Finkelstein described as the Holocaust industry and the uses that are being made of the Holocaust to silence and blackmail people into capitulation or inaction, inactivity on this question have been getting stronger and stronger. And so let's try and defeat them where it really matters, not just, as someone else said in their comments on sort of ritual demonstrations that we should have, because they're important to show that we are not frightened, but also occasionally changing the targets. I mean, the Israeli embassy, I recall during the years when we were fighting against apartheid in South Africa, one anti-apartheid group had a lunchtime picket of the South African embassy in Trafalgar Square every single day, whether it was 5 people or 10 people, or sometimes it became hundreds, later thousands. The picket grew and grew. Something like that has to be planned outside the Israeli embassy to show that we are completely opposed to what is going on in the Middle East, where the Palestinians are more isolated than they have ever been since 1948. The Arab governments have abandoned them. Their own leaderships have collaborated cruelly with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and have left their people leaderless. The situation in Gaza, politically, economically, socially, is absolutely miserable. Gaza is the largest ghetto in the world today. Its people are treated like dirt by the occupying power, which doesn't occupy directly, but watches from the neighboring hilltops and sees what is happening, occasionally lobs a few bombs in, prevents aid reaching Gaza, refuses to allow the Gazans to have their own airport. In other words, the Palestinian entity, the Palestinian people, their daily lives are being destroyed. That is what is happening. You know, you read about olive trees being burned. You read about homes being occupied on order of the Israeli judiciary, people being driven out of East Jerusalem. And this is going to end, this is going to get worse and worse and worse. So for me, the main task is, regardless of what the Labour Party does or doesn't do, and it's not going to do anything, to build and strengthen a campaign in solidarity with the Palestinian people, not even their leaderships, which have let them down so badly, but with the Palestinian people in their struggles, large or small, which lie ahead. It doesn't cost us anything to do that. It just is a question of time. And once the pandemic retreats a bit, which is likely by the next few months, we are told, then I think we have to start organizing in public. It's not going to go on. Today, the same board of deputies who have been attacking Corbyn have attacked Facebook and Twitter for not imposing censorship. And censorship on what? On anti-Semitism. Well, I ask, who is going to determine what is anti-Semitism and what isn't? I mean, I'm sure we know there's a lot of rubbish put on in the social networks, but to try and stop voices of dissent on the question of Palestine and Israel on the social networks is going to be a disaster. It won't work. People will find other ways of communicating and moving on. And the situation in Britain now, I find, in terms of this particular struggle, is the worst it's been ever. When Ken Loach can be stopped from serving on a committee and described as anti-Semitic, then you do wonder what the world for this country is coming to. It has an utterly debased political culture now, in which this can go on. And were it just conservative newspapers, I mean, they're totally opportunists, as we know. Doing this, you would sort of shrug it off. But the Guardian has been centrally involved in this particular campaign, in denouncing Corbyn's leadership, in being totally uncritical of the new Labour leader. He just has to smile in the news headline, Keir Starmer smiled today. I mean, that's what it's like, reading these wretched newspapers. And that is very deliberate, because with the defeat of the Labour left, weak though it was in Parliament, the scale of the defeat now is such, it is going to be difficult to mount an offensive from within the Labour Party. People can try, and best of luck to them. I don't say they shouldn't, but it's going to be extremely difficult. Let Momentum or someone else set up a solidarity with Palestine group inside the Labour Party. Let them set it up and see how they go, and best of luck to them. But meanwhile, those of us who aren't in the Labour Party, or who've been expelled or suspended or whatever, or who are leaving, have to remain active on this particular question. And I know all the members on the platform have been. Let's not, I mean, they might get away with it, the Israelis. Unfortunately, they probably will in what they are planning, but let's make it as difficult as possible from our side. But that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Tariq. There's quite a lot of things you said and quite a lot of suggestions of what we could do. And I'm sure we're discussing that in future and how we can consolidate this campaign. Our final speaker, before we try to open it up from the floor, if we have time, is from America, Norman Finkelstein. Tariq did gave a very good reason why you should read his outstanding work, The Holocaust Industry. It is an entertaining read as well as a very historically very, very interesting read. So I'd urge everybody to read this. So we're very honored to have you with us, Norman. You're on.
Well, thank you for having me. I don't have a watch in front of me, so please don't stand in ceremony. Tell me when to stop.
Okay. You're a bit quiet, comrade. Could you speak up a little bit or go a bit closer to the microphone? Thank you.
I'm not sure where the microphone is on this contraption because
That's much better, Norman, where you are speaking from.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I did not prepare remarks because I figured, as turned out to be the case, that many people would have made the points before me, and therefore I would end up repeating just what's been said. And so rather than prepared remarks, I want to use this occasion to react to what I've heard. And for pedagogical purposes, I suppose, there's no point in me reiterating where I agree. I'll use this occasion to show, to express where I disagree, but also bearing in mind that doesn't mean there's a large overlap, in my opinion, with what's been said. I'll just focus on where I disagree, or where I think I might have something to supplement the remarks that have been made. First of all, on the question of the tactics of the Israel lobby in the UK and as well in the United States, it's important to understand why they've resorted to these kinds of ruthless and transparently undemocratic methods of trying to suppress discussion of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And the main reason is because Israel lost, probably you could say around 2000, in that period, it was clear that Israel had lost the battle for public opinion. Israel was very confident since 1948. They had a very effective propaganda apparatus, and that the apparatus on the other side was weak, it was feeble, and therefore it commanded all public discussion of the Israel-Palestine conflict, or back then it was called the Israel-Arab conflict. And so it was confident that any public debate, it would easily prevail. And so it was all for democracy, all for public debate, because the balance was on their side. Beginning in, I would say, if you were to ask me to date it, I would say beginning with the first Lebanon War in June 1982, and then pretty much climaxing with Operation Cast Lead in 2007, 2008, or was it like, yeah, 2008, 2009. Now my memory slipped, but it's either, let's just go 2007, 8. In that period, there was a gradual incremental loss in the persuasiveness of the Israeli case. And after Operation Cast Lead, it was very difficult for Israel to sustain itself in public debate. And so at that point, they decided to take off the kid gloves, to forget about pretenses of democracy, forget about free speech, and just to pretty ruthlessly throttle any opponents of Israel in the public domain, and by acting behind the scenes. And so I think it should be borne in mind that the reason Israel resorted to these, essentially, you might call it terror tactics, of which one of the panelists mentioned, the reason they resorted to those tactics is because they had lost the battle for public opinion. On the question of what was behind the attack, the anti-Semitism attack on labor, I guess I agree with parts, but I disagree with other parts of what's been said. Originally, the attack on Corbyn, it came from the Jewish establishment in the UK. That's uncontroversial. And I think it's also uncontroversial to say that they were instrumentalizing or weaponizing anti-Semitism in order to stop Jeremy Corbyn and his wing of the Labour Party, which was highly critical of Israel and much more supportive of the Palestinians. But that really can't explain why it became a national hysteria. Mostly these are kinds of intramural battles between the Israel apologists and the left when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict. But it pretty rapidly escalated into a national hysteria against Corbyn and the left for being anti-Semitic. And there, I don't believe it had all that much to do with Israel. The fact was, Corbyn was a much bigger threat, or he posed a much bigger threat than just Israel and the Palestinians. He represented a radical, he posed a radical threat to the status quo. And the status quo was not happy about that fact. The status quo included everyone. I followed it fairly closely, and I also had the assistance of Jamie Stern Weiner, Deborah McCobie, who sent me lots and lots and lots of links every day and commentary. It included everyone. It was everyone from The Guardian on one end to the Daily Mirror and Sky News, or I should say in the Mirror and the tabloids at the other end. It included the whole of the non-print media, BBC, Sky News, everyone. And it wasn't Israel or the attacks in Israel that exercised them. What exercised them to the point of panic at some point was the fear that the Corbyn wing of the party might actually come into power and threaten what was and is a very good life for them. So I think there's an error in judgment to think that it was all about Israel. Actually, I think the Israel aspect initiated the attacks on Corbyn, but it was overshadowed significantly by the time the hysteria had escalated to trying to stop Corbyn, not because of what he represented regarding Israel, and not only what he represented regarding foreign policy, but Corbyn as the exponent of and the social force representing a real challenge to the status quo in the UK. I would also add that there's a kind of irony here because you're watching what ought to be struggles of the left, namely the struggle against anti-Semitism, the struggle against racism, being instrumentalized by the ruling elites in order to stop the left. And you saw a similar phenomenon in the United States, but in a different register. Bernie Sanders' candidacy, it came under assault, not by the forces claiming anti-Semitism, which proved to be pretty marginal. I was wrong on that point. It proved to be pretty marginal in the United States. What was used to dethrone, to stop, in the end successfully, what was used to stop the Bernie Sanders campaign was identity politics. The charges first made against Bernie Sanders was the Bernie Bros claim that he was hostile to women, that it was all white males who supported Bernie Sanders. And then it was claimed that Bernie Sanders had no base, no roots, no support in the African American community. And then, just as in 2016, when Bernie first ran, just as in 2016, one has to be honest about these things. It was the African American community that killed the Bernie Sanders candidacy as the Democratic Party weaponized identity politics. By the way, most significantly in 2020, it was Barack Obama weaponizing the identity politics, which again is roughly a left cause, defending the cause of minorities and persecuted minorities and so forth, weaponizing the identity politics to stop Bernie Sanders in the United States. I want to say just a few brief words because I suppose most people are familiar with my opinion on this topic, so I don't want to belabor it in the time that I have. It's the use of a certain language which I find both imprecise, alienating, and politically sterile, if not counterproductive. The most obvious case is the use of terms like Zionism, which in my opinion, I can claim, let's call it a modest amount of expertise on the topic because I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the theory of Zionism. I think these terms like Zionism don't define anything specific or explicit enough that they communicate a meaningful political message to the broad public. Most people in the broad public don't know what Zionism is, and frankly, couldn't care less what Zionism is if they were asked to. In fact, most Zionists or self-proclaimed Zionists probably don't know much about Zionism. I doubt 1 in 10,000 Zionists, I take that back, 1 in 100,000 Zionists have read Herzl's The Jewish State, even though it's a very tiny volume, runs to like 60 pages. I doubt they've read it. They know none of the foundational works. What Zionism basically means in the current world is belief in the right of Jews to have a state of their own. And underpinning that is our notions of Jewish superiority and Jewish supremacy. That to me is, roughly speaking, don't want to get into details, but roughly speaking, it's become an ideology of Jewish supremacy, and its main political manifestation is the goal of a Jewish state, or to preserve a state for the Jews, even at the expense of non-Jews in that Jewish state. So I think it's much more useful if you want to communicate a message that has resonance in the broad public and doesn't turn them off or turn them indifferent, to specify exactly what we're talking about. Do you believe Jews have the right to a state of their own, which renders non-Jews in that state second-class citizens, and in the ideal situation, would want to see all the non-Jews vanish? Do you believe in that idea? I think if you pose the question in those terms, you're much more likely to first elicit a reaction from a broad public, and most likely the answer is going to be a no. That kind of setup is unacceptable. So I personally think it's much more useful to use precise language. When the Bolsheviks in 1917 seized power, they didn't ask the public to take a stand on the theory of surplus value or the communist creed, or from each according to his ability to each according to his need. They put forth a slogan which practical people could understand: bread, peace, and land. And I think we should learn from that, which is you may have your own theoretical convictions, and they may be precious to you, and you may want to hug them. But when you're trying to speak to a broad public, you should use a language that the broad public can understand, comprehend, and hopefully also embrace. I would also say that goes to using terms like anti-Semitism and anti-Semites. So Tony Greenstein, I agree with him on actually quite a lot. But when he says things like, well, if you call Jews killers of Christ, you're an anti-Semite. If you engage in Holocaust denial, you're an anti-Semite. I think Mr. Wadsworth said, if I understood him correctly, and I might be wrong here, but he opposed the publication of David Irving's Diaries of Goebbels because Irving is a Hitler apologist. I think all of that, the labels like anti-Semite, I don't know if Jews killed Christ or not. Frankly, I don't really care all that much. It doesn't keep me up late at night or exercise me when I get up in the morning. But those are sorts of things which should just be debated, disputed, and you come out with your own conclusions. Did the Jews do it or did they not? When Mel Gibson made his film Passion of the Christ, he seemed to have started off by blaming Jewish moneylenders or the Jews in the temple for Christ's killing, and then he was forced to change the script. I don't see why anyone should be forced to change anything. Express your point of view. If somebody disagrees with it, let them disagree. I don't see why one has to get so excited about it. In the case of David Irving, well, David Irving was a very good historian. I don't care what Richard Evans says. He was a very good historian. He produced works which are substantive. And I happen to have read the Goebbels diary, his book on Goebbels. He had stolen the plates, which were stolen the plates of the diaries and then wrote a book on it. I thought the book was frankly mediocre, but it certainly should have been published. I mean, mediocre books, there are about 1,000 mediocre books published each month versus one good book. So if it falls in the category of mediocre, okay, not a big deal. I don't see why one would want to stop publication of it. Doesn't register with me. If you don't like it, don't read it. They actually, in the case of Irving, he knew a thing or two. Actually, he knew a thing or two or three. He is competent, so far as I can tell. The same thing with this rapper, Mr. Wiley. I had some correspondence this morning and last night with Jamie Stern-Weiner and with Deborah McCoby because I asked them to prime me for today. Jamie was kind enough to send me all the tweets. Some of the tweets I agree with Jackie Walker. Some of the tweets were awful, I guess. Some of them were provocative, I suppose you would call it. I mean, some of the tweets, I have to say, one of the tweets, the first one that Jamie sent me was with the pictures of the Bolsheviks who were allegedly responsible for the Bolsheviks and their comrades, who were allegedly responsible for the murder of millions of Christians. And they had a picture of Leo Jogishis. I thought to myself, who even knows who he is? I know who he is. He was Rosa Luxemburg's first lover. And he was the head of the Polish left-wing Communist Party. But nobody even knows who he is. I suspect the only two people here who know him are Tariq and Tony. Not exactly the biggest figure, even the pantheon of socialism. Not exactly a big figure. So I don't see what's the reason to get excited. I don't see the reason to get excited about Holocaust deniers. First of all, I don't know what a Holocaust denier is. I don't. Because some people say if you deny that the centrality of the 6 million Jews being killed and you try to bring in other groups of people, you become a Holocaust denier. Other people say if you deny the centrality of the gas chambers, you become a Holocaust denier. So by that standard, strangely enough, and I guess Tariq and Tony will be the only ones to remember, by that standard, Daniel Jonah Goldhagen, the author of Hitler's Willing Executioners, that best-selling schmata, he's a Holocaust denier. because he claimed that the core of the Holocaust didn't occur in the gas chambers. He said it was in the killing fields that the essence of the Holocaust occurred. And then the fellow who, his name just slipped my mind, but you can help me with that, who made the 12-hour film Shoah, Lanzmann. Right, so then Lanzmann started to accuse Goldhagen of being a Holocaust denier because Lanzmann focused on the gas chambers. And then the question of the numbers, how many were killed? Well, those are statistical, scholarly questions. Why can't we just answer a number with a number and present our sources? Some African Americans will tell you 100 million Africans perished in the Middle Passage. 100 million Africans perished. I was very surprised when I read Robin Blackburn's History of Slavery. He put the number at 1.2 million. I'm almost certain of that. Now, does that mean that Robin Blackburn is a slave trade denier? Or do we just go through the numbers? We evaluate, assess, any serious scholar does. I don't see the point of becoming hysterical over these issues. You just patiently wade through the evidence. If you don't agree, you explain why you don't agree. I don't believe in censoring any of these people, including, I would have to say, I don't agree with censoring the rapper Mr. Wiley. He has the right to say what he wants, and if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Actually, get off of Twitter and maybe crack a book. That might be an exciting adventure for you. And on a second related matter, I'm much more exercised by Marc Regev appearing so respectfully on British television, justifying the murder of, in the case of Operation Protective Edge, justifying the murder of 550 Palestinian children, justify the murder of, or the destruction of 18,000 Palestinian homes. That really makes me very indignant, very angry. He has the right to do it, but it makes me much angrier than what Mr. Wiley has to say about the Nazi Holocaust. In the same way in the US, Kanye West, he says all sorts of lunatic things every other day. He says slavery wasn't so, Kanye West, of course, is African American, but he says slavery couldn't have been so bad because blacks accepted it for 400 years. And then he said, Harriet Tubman, the great leader of the Underground Railway, he said she didn't really free slaves because she ended up finding them jobs with other white employers. As if, her responsibility was not just to get African Americans out of slavery, but she had a responsibility to give them a lifetime pension. Rappers say stupid things. Rappers say lunatic things. I mean, I think it's your problem if you look for political wisdom from a rapper. Okay, in my stupid youth, I looked for political wisdom from Jane Fonda and Glenda and Vanessa Redgrave. Hey, that was dumb. I'll agree, but to get hysterical, to get exercised, I don't see it at all. If you want to get exercised about people who are apologizing in public for crimes that are being committed in real time. Not about what somebody has to say about the Nazi Holocaust or about slavery or about the Middle Passage. Maybe it's dumb, maybe it's not dumb, but we can just go through the normal protocol of trying to separate out truth from lies. And the very last thing I'll say is, with all due respect to Chris Williamson, I don't think the strategy is to have a cancel culture of our own. Now, I understood that you were using it in a kind of loose sense, but I think we should do exactly what the point of this forum this afternoon suggested that we do. We should be fighting any assaults on freedom of speech. We should be upholding, as the first woman said, the best part of the left tradition, the tradition in Marx and the tradition in Rosa Luxemburg, and I still resonate to what Rosa Luxemburg wrote in her critique of the Russian Revolution, where she said, we don't have answers. Socialism it's just a very theoretical general idea, and that we need lots of free debate, free discussion as we try to find a path in uncharted waters. There are no answers. And the only way we can find the truth, okay, you may not like the expression because it has the capitalist overtone, the marketplace of ideas, the unfettered, full, fearless exchange of opinions, what Mill called the standing invitation to the world to prove you wrong. Luxemburg puts it in her own language. She doesn't use capitalist metaphors, but the idea is the same, that nobody has monopoly over truth. Everybody is fallible. A minority of even one can possess truth, and that we should allow for the full, free discussion of ideas. I want to emphasize, because I had a little exchange with Jamie on this point around a week ago, I don't think the reason we want to have a full, fearless discussion of ideas is not just so we won't appear hypocritical, that is to say, we don't denounce others for repressing speech while repressing speech ourselves. It's not a utilitarian calculus. The principle is you can't make any progress in this world in the absence of truth. Otherwise, you're just living in a world of mystifications and shadows. And the only way you can acquire, grasp, reach that truth is by allowing for everybody to speak, that standing invitation to the world to prove you wrong. And that's how we will advance, progress as a movement, and hopefully as a humanity.
Thank you very much, Norman. I have let Norman speak a bit longer than was planned, but I think it was really worth it. I really enjoyed it. And I've made the decision now that we can't have really questions from the floor. Sorry about everybody who's tried to get in. I could ask maybe perhaps the panelists, if you look at the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, you can reply to a few questions perhaps in the Q&A if you feel like it. I think it was a fantastic contribution. I really enjoyed it. Hold on a second. I was going to suggest that what we do, I've looked through some of the questions that we try when we're summing up. I was going to raise 3 subjects that perhaps the speakers could come back to and which reflects something that most questions were about. First of all, is exactly the question that Norman has touched upon, is freedom of speech. Of course, we want freedom of speech for ourselves. We don't want to be shut up, but I think Norman hits the nail on the head. That must mean that we also fight for the freedom of speech for people to call us anti-Semites and to call us racists. They're wrong and we will challenge them. But I think if we start, and there's been a lot of communication about that in the chat, if we start saying, well, but not him because he's a Nazi, or not him because he's a Zionist, and not him, that what will happen, comrades, is that this will be turned against us. A very famous example was 1936, the Battle of Cable Street. The CPGB fought for Public Order Act against the fascists. The government was happy to oblige. Public Order Act came in, and who was it used against? Not against the fascists, it was used against the left and against the communists. We have to be very careful, I think, to fight for restrictions on freedom of speech, even if it's of people that we don't like and we disagree with. So I think it's an important issue, and I would like comrades to get back on that. The other issue that we've picked up on is, I think, the question of the Labour Party. And there are different views on that matter. Should we stay or should we go? Should we set up something new? Should we retain, should we stay in and be out? Just my personal view, if we can stay in, fight, speak up, but also fight outside. But there is the question of the trade union affiliation to the Labour Party, which makes it still, in what Lenin called it, and it's still correct, a bourgeois workers' party, the British Labour Party. The unions are affiliated to it. Then there's the electoral system, which makes it very difficult for a party outside the Labour Party to grow and become bigger than what we have plenty thereof, which is small left groups who turn more or less quickly into sects of one sort or another. Third question then is really the moving forward for our campaign. I think it would be good, I think, if we can develop some ideas. I mean, Tariq made some concrete ideas on how to fight for the rights of Palestinians, but also I think a campaign for freedom of speech in the Labour movement and beyond, especially because it's such an international issue. We should consider how we can consolidate and move forward and how we organize. So it would be fantastic if the panelists could come back to those three questions. I'm not going to take it quite in reverse order, but a little bit. So I was going to bring in Tony first for about 3 to 4 minutes, if that's okay.
Yes, fine. Firstly, we have set up a petition on the right of free association and speech. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
It's on there. That petition is on the internet. It means gone to from my blog and various other places. I can show you. In fact, I can't. But anyone who's interested, please contact me if you can't find the link. It's basically from people in the Labour Party saying we do not accept pledge number 5, commandment number 5, that members of the Labour Party cannot speak on the same platform with anyone like myself or Chris Williamson or Jackie or Marc who've been expelled or suspended. And I think that's quite important. So I would like people to sign that if they're a member of the Labour Party. Just one or two things. I agree entirely with Norman that the witch hunt, the Labour witch hunt, was not just about people who supported Palestine and who were anti-Zionist. It was very clearly about Corbyn being seen as a threat to the traditional bipartisan foreign policy between the Labour Party and the Tory Party. Support for NATO, support for Israel as an armed watchdog in the Middle East and so on. Clearly that is the case. Most of the right wing of the Labour Party, in fact, I would say all of it, doesn't give a blind toss about any form of racism, including anti-Semitism. The point I made about Rachel Reeves, she used the term Christ killers, or rather Nancy Astor, who she was supporting, used the term Christ killers in reference to Jews. And in that context, the term Christ killers is clearly anti-Semitic. I don't think there's any doubt about it at all. As to who killed Christ, well, we all have our own opinions, and that is an esoteric subject I don't want to get into a debate about. Similarly, about Goebbels' diaries, yes, I think they should have been published. I don't know where Norman got the idea, I didn't. Yes, any valuable source material on the Holocaust is something that should be revealed, even if it has to come via David Irving, who I agree is a historian. One can't take it away from him. The problem is his politics have got in the way of his history and his research, and he certainly did tamper with sources from my reading of the transcript of the Irving trial. But the main point about this meeting is we have to fight back for what was said is freedom of speech on Palestine and Israel. Starmer has made it quite clear he wants to clamp down on that. And he wants to clamp down on that because that is the main way in which he attacks the left in the Labour Party. I don't think people should just abandon the Labour Party. I agree with Tariq and others that it's very, very difficult. I think we have to have a combined approach. People who are still in the Labour Party working alongside people who are outside the Labour Party. But we have to be clear of one thing. With the disappearance of Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer represents, if you like, a return to the days of Tony Blair. That there is no doubt, and we have to keep fighting. Unfortunately, the Zionists have used the question of Palestine as the means by which they can beat us around the head. And we have to rebut that and reject that and say, if you opposed apartheid 30 years ago in South Africa, then today you should be opposing apartheid in Israel. There really is no difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to take Chris and then David, please.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Norman's comments about free speech. The point that I was making is, yes, no problem with people extolling Zionism. But what I'm arguing for is that we should have the right, and indeed it's our duty, to explain that Zionism is a racist ideology. And I think the point that Tony was making in his contribution is the double standards that are being displayed by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. In fact, not just Keir Starmer, actually, double standards were in evidence even before Starmer came to the fore in the Labour Party bureaucracy. So those people who believe in a ethical foreign policy, those people who support the Palestinians' rights to return to their homeland, who oppose the way in which the Israeli state abuses the rights of the Palestinian people. It's the Zionist ideology, which obviously pervades the policy agenda of the Israeli government, clearly compromises the rights of the Palestinian people. It's a supremacist ideology, and I think it's absolutely incumbent on us, those of us who are anti-racists, to actually make that point very, very clearly, because I think a lot of people don't understand that. As for the future of the Labour Party, I think the best thing we can do is hasten the demise of the Labour Party. It's lost its purpose. I think it's a completely forlorn proposition to campaign inside the Labour Party to try and get it back on track. It's never going to get back on track. We didn't achieve that with Jeremy Corbyn, with a mass movement behind him. It's going to be absolutely impossible now. But I understand that people are fighting a rearguard action, if you like, working behind enemy lines. Fine, okay, do that. But I think where the main thrust of our efforts should be is on extra parliamentary activities. And just in terms of the future going forward, I think that's kind of linked to the first point, really about, exposing Zionism for the racist ideology that it is. But I was very struck by Tariq's suggestion and his reference back to the campaign against the other apartheid regime in South Africa, although we know that what's happening in Palestine now is even worse, and many people who lived through the apartheid regime in South Africa have said that. But the point that Tariq was making about the incessant picketing of the South African embassy is something, I think, a very practical thing that we could look to do as part of the extra parliamentary activities that we should engage in to promote this case of free speech, but also to highlight the abuse, frankly, that is meted out on a routine daily basis by the outrageous apartheid Israeli regime against the Palestinian people. And one of the ways in which we could do that and sort of bring it to the attention, I think, of the public is by trying to mount and organize those regular pickets outside the Israeli embassy.
Thank you, Chris. David, and then Mark, and then I'm going to bring Tariq and Norman and Jackie as last speaker, if that's okay.
I'm sorry, Tina. I must apologize. I have to leave. I thought we'd finished before this.
Okay. Do you want
some people waiting for me?
Okay.
So
okay.
Me, but it's been great talking to all of you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tariq. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
See you soon then. Bye-bye. Okay, David, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a strategic problem in discussing this under the rubric of free speech on Israel or Zionism or anti-Semitism. I mean, there isn't free speech for racists. No one thinks that it's acceptable for racists to intimidate, coerce, and threaten people. There are laws against it. It's against the law. Nobody believes in free speech for racists. Although I do hear Norman and Tony perhaps saying that they do. And the problem with defending the principle of freedom of speech in relation to this issue is that we don't have the freedom of speech and they have the freedom of speech. And we're never going to get the freedom of speech because they're in power. And so it seems to me that what we should be talking about is not counterposing our conception of Zionism as racism, which I think most of us are agreed on, with their conception that we're all anti-Semites. Because that's a balance which is based on falsehood and is based on a racist understanding of how things are. It's not acceptable for them to call us racist. It's untrue. So I think what we should be saying is not how we create slightly more space for the left to say slightly more things about Palestine and Israel, while they at the same time are using their speech to destroy people's lives, careers, mental health, and jobs, as Jackie mentioned. What instead we should be saying is, no, we're not here to defend freedom of speech. We're here to end Zionism. That's the purpose of this discussion, not freedom of speech. I don't believe that racists should have freedom of speech, and I don't think anybody else does. So that's what I would say about this. You know, it's not a strategically good idea to say run a campaign on freedom of speech. It is much more strategically good to say let's focus on Zionism. And I take Norman's point. You know, people don't understand when the Bolsheviks came to power, they discussed bread and peace and land. Yes, of course, people need to understand, but they're not going to understand unless we tell them, unless they are educated. The level of political education in this country is very poor. We know that that's part of the reason that Corbyn lost, the lack of political education in CLPs and indeed on the left more broadly. But we cannot win a battle against the racist ideology of Zionism without telling anyone what Zionism is and explaining what it is, how it's a settler colonial ideology and how it requires the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians for it to function. So I'm much more of the view that we should be saying, look, what we've got to do here is make an argument about Zionism. Let's make this argument, make it clear what Zionism is. And of course, there are complexities to how people understand their own Zionism and how people understand other people's Zionism. But nevertheless, we cannot win this battle without making a mass attempt for there to be mass understanding of what Zionism is and how it can be defeated.
Thank you, David. I'm one of them who believes in free speech for racists. I certainly do. It's a you know, we're the racists at the moment, aren't we? That's the point. We are being called the racists at the moment.
That's right, but the point is, of course, that's not true, and they get away with that because they're allowed.
You say it's not true, but they say it's true, and they probably believe it. Even I think there's a real problem. You know, you're probably not. I don't know if you call yourself a Marxist or not, but Karl Marx and Rosa Luxemburg were very, very clear that without free speech, you're never going to win the whole working class to the idea of socialism. There's so many ideas in society, and you have to let them out. You can't push them down. You can't push them underground.
You can't push the ideas of the powerful down. What on earth does that mean?
I'm gonna not get into two-way, but I'm gonna bring in Marc first and then Norman.
Well, can I first say that it's been a pleasure being on this platform with three fine Jewish comrades, including the world-renowned Norman Finkelstein, and of course Chris Williamson and David Miller. David being another fine scholar, Chris, who taught me the meaning of solidarity in the Labour Party when he stood by my side during a very difficult period when I was radioactive, really. He was one of only 3 Labour MPs who came to my aid. The rest ran for cover. And I pay tribute to you, comrade, for that help that you gave me, including turning up at my hearing when 50 white MPs, Labour MPs, marched against me in a scene that wouldn't have been amiss in Mississippi burning in 1964, when, of course, 2 Jewish civil rights comrades died alongside a black activist fighting for voter registration in the Deep South. That's the sort of solidarity I want us to return to as black people, as Jewish people. And it's been harmed by the weaponization of anti-Semitism by unscrupulous right-wingers who don't give a damn about fighting anti-Semitism or fighting the racism that black people face on a daily basis. We only have to think about Breonna Taylor and George Floyd in America and the revulsion worldwide that sparked all the uprisings. Now, I'm optimistic when it comes to the Labour Party. Surprise, surprise. I would have disagreed with Tariq, actually, who I think was quite, you know, sort of negative about our potential as the left to recapture it. My belief, I agree with you, Chris, is insurgency. This is what Peter Tatchell was saying in 1981 when the Labour Party NEC refused to at first endorse him. In the end, that they did. But he was talking about extra parliamentary activity, not just gay rights. He was talking about insurgency. He was talking about a rent strike, that there should be a picket of parliament. That was his crime, you know, and of all people, a left winger, Michael Foot, was arguing against him being endorsed. And this was a time when they tried to keep Tariq out of the party as well, which they succeeded in doing. I think we've got to learn lessons as the left. I think we've got to learn the lesson that what the Jeremy Corbyn project did, if you want to not personalize it, in appeasing, apologizing and capitulating to our enemies as socialists was wrong. And I don't just accept that, oh, it was his advisors, Seamus Milne, Carrie Murphy, Andrew Murray, you know, that they were on the wrong trajectory, desperate to get him into number 10 and John McDonnell into number 11. And that's why they did this. Because I've been a leader of the Labour Party black sections in the 1980s, and then the Anti-Racist Alliance, the largest black movement in Europe at the time. And you are advised, but in the end, as a leader, you decide. And Jeremy must take responsibility for hurling us under the bus, or a bus. And he's got to have a moment of reckoning that that was actually a mistake along with Brexit, and one of the reasons why he lost the 2019 election. I agree with Norman. Most people in the public wouldn't have understood, perhaps, this whole internecine war over anti-Semitism. But what they would have understood is that Jeremy Corbyn did not stand by his allies, did not stand by his friends. And as working class people, we know that that is a very important principle. And that's what I used to hear down the pub. He's not a leader. And that was one of the reasons why people said Jeremy wasn't a leader, because he didn't stick up for his own. And I'm very saddened by that. I'm optimistic that we've got a future if we organize in the workplace, on the streets, in our communities, and we launch the fight back from outside the party. I don't think it can be done from within, because the victory of the right under Blairite Starmer.
You've got something over the microphone. You've got something over your microphone.
Sorry. I don't think we can win necessarily in the party. I think that we will win outside. We will reclaim the party from outside, in our communities, in our workplaces, on the streets, as Black Lives Matter has shown us, as Occupy has shown us, as Extinction Rebellion has shown us, and the animal rights campaigns have shown us. That is where the struggle is, and I relish that challenge.
Thank you very much, Mark. Norman, then, please, if you want to say a few more things in reply.
At the risk of sounding repetitive, I just want to reiterate one point. As a youth, I was a Marxist-Leninist believer in Mao Zedong thought. We were all confident in that period in my life that we possessed truth, and anybody who disagreed with us was either a bourgeois or a petty bourgeois or a victim of false consciousness and all sorts of other things. But we were the embodiment of, because we knew the science, we knew Marxism, Leninism, we knew Mao Zedong thought, we possessed the science, we knew truth. And well, in my case, when Mao Zedong passed from the scene and China reversed itself, and from being the cutting edge of world communism, it rather quickly became the cutting edge of world capitalism, I realized that no, I didn't possess the truth, and that a lot of the things that were said contradicting me were true. I was wrong. And that humbled me. It humbled me, actually, more than humbling me, it totally humiliated me. That was the hardest part. Not that I was wrong, but that I was such a self-righteous, pompous ass, dismissing everybody who disagreed with me as being some victim of some kind of ideology, and that I possessed the truth. And so I'm much more cautious about saying with 100% certainty that some person is wrong and that I'm right. And I think it's a useful caution. First of all, even if you think somebody is wrong, you have no right, as John Stuart Mill says, to decide that question for others. You can't say, well, I think you're wrong, and therefore everybody else can hear what you have to say. Mill called that the presumption of infallibility, and I think he was right on that point. So even if David is convinced that that person is a racist, I'm not a racist, that person is an anti-Semite, I'm not an anti-Semite, you have no right to decide that question for others, because you would only have that right if you were infallible, if you were God. And so long as you have, as all of us do, I think, the limitations and failings of being mortals, you have no right to deny other people access to an idea which, because you're not infallible, it might be true. The second thing is, I don't really agree with these kinds of so-called, I would say, kind of radical posturing. There's no such thing as freedom of speech. Of course there is. We're exercising it right now. We're reaching people, we're talking to people. Hopefully we're persuading, convincing some of those that we're listening to. In the United States, the whole proposition of freedom of speech really backfired on the US ruling elites with the Bernie Sanders candidacy. Because suddenly on national television, you were hearing this guy, this old Jew from Brooklyn, talking about the 1%, that big pharma, as he called it, they're all crooks. The Walton family, the richest family, he said they're all crooks. Goldman Sachs, they're all crooks. He was saying things on national television which never heard before. And that was because he was able to exercise that freedom of speech. And whatever happened to his candidacy, you could say, yes, he was defeated, in my opinion, defeated ironically by identity politics. But the fact of the matter is his message carried. By the time his candidacy had reached its peak, a large proportion of the American people had been persuaded by the proposition of health care for all, had been persuaded by the proposition of redistributing wealth. So I think we should be very cautious and careful before we dismiss the possibilities, the potentials of freedom of speech, because I think that's an important value to preserve if we hope ever to persuade the broader population of the rightness of our opinions.
Thank you, Norman. I think you make a very convincing case. Okay, the last person, I would also say there's a difference between free speech and for racists and not letting racists attack you, or opposing them when they're on the street. That's quite a big difference there. Okay, Jackie, to be the last speaker now. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I want to say I've noticed on a discussion, and it's the kind of thing that comes up again and again, and it's about thinking that disagreeing or debating with people is about division, that this is an example of division on the left. Disagreeing with people, debating with people is how you come to a position. If you have no division, then you might as well not speak at all. So let's just get over that and stop thinking that the way that we actually move forward is through pretending we all have one position. We don't. I want to just say one story that happened to me, and I think it was Wes Streeting, who at one point, when the witch hunt, I can't say it was at its worst, because it's not like, for me, it's actually calmed down at all. I mean, last week I was in a couple of newspapers yet again, because they can't quite burn the witch, but never mind. I think it was Wes Streeting who said in a tweet, if Jackie Walker wants to come with me to my local synagogue, I will debate her. And I messaged him and tweeted to him publicly, and I said, yes, anytime you like, I will do it. He then blocked me. That's the point. That's the point, that as socialists, we should not be frightened of free speech. The second point is, my profession at one point was as an anti-racist trainer. How you move racists is by going into dialogue and beating them politically. The law can take care of racism, which is, that kind of violent racism that threatens people. Personally, I want to defeat racists in the same way that we defeated UKIP on the streets in Thanet, in the same way that I converted racists when I was acting as an anti-racist trainer, through dialogue and through actual exemplifying for them how we can actually see the world in a way that makes it easy and great and beautiful and beneficial for us all to live in. So do I believe in freedom of speech? Yes, I do. Do I think that we should ban racists? Do I think we should line up and forbid racists to speak? No. I think we should enter in dialogue with Wes Streeting, with Louise Ellman, with the Board of Deputies, with them all. And it's the fact that they refuse that debate. It's the fact that we are so scary to them that they have to give a commandment that should people dare to speak on a platform with me, they will also be burned. That shows you how powerful the word is, and it destroys all of us if we undermine that.
Tina, can I just say that we didn't mention the Ford inquiry, the deadline for which submissions is the 7th of August. It's been, extended, and Grassroots Black Left, which I'm a part of, has put in a very powerful 4,000-word submission. And I encourage other people to, even though it's been sabotaged to an extent by Starmer, I still think that we need to use it as an opportunity.
Yeah, quite right. We're also doing, Labour Against the Witch Hunt is doing a counter conference on the leaked report. So when the result of that Ford inquiry, which we can guess now what it's going to be, we want to organize a counter conference that I think pretty much everybody on this platform is coming to as well. I think that was a really, really good discussion. It was really worthwhile talking about the issue of what freedom of speech actually means. And I think we've got a bit of a few differences there amongst us, which is not a problem, as Jackie said. That's how we develop ideas. So I really enjoyed that. What we can concretely do is exactly what Jackie hinted at and Tony hinted at in their contributions. Not accept the making of unpersons for a start, which is of course what the Board of Deputies and Keir Starmer is doing, which means that, Marc, Tony, Jackie, Chris, myself, everybody who's been expelled it's a problem if you speak on a platform with them. Don't accept it. Invite them to your meetings. There's CLP and branch meetings again. Invite them to your trade union meetings. Get into trouble, yes, but the only reason to stay now in the Labour Party is to fight, surely. So at least try it out. Have motions in support of the comrades. Have motions against the Board of Deputies' 10 pledges and against implementing them. There's plenty of model motions on Law's website, on Labour Left Alliance website, and just do not accept it. It's the small and the little fights I think we can launch now. But I really enjoyed that, and I'm sure that's not going to be the last session in that series and this campaign. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Great conversation.
It was very good, actually, yes.
Yes, it was a good meeting.
Really enjoyed it.
Where can we find the recording?
Okay, we're still live, so people can still listen, but it's on Labour Left Alliance Facebook page. You can still go there now and share the video from there. Also on the Law Facebook page. I copied you in, Tony. You should have got a little ping with your name.
We're going to put it on YouTube, Tina.
Yes, tomorrow I'll put it on YouTube.
Okay, that will be easier, I think.
And I'll copy you all and I'll email you all the...
with a full 2 hours, or will it be edited?
I don't think I have time to edit it, to be honest. And it was very good from beginning to end. I don't know what I would cut out.
Remarkably good meeting. Congrats.
Yes, congratulations to everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, unless you have any suggestions of who I should cut out, but I'm not sure.
The only thing is, I think we need to get a meeting fairly quickly so we can see where to go from here. That's all.
How's the letter, the round robin letter going? Is it getting any traction in the Morning Star or the usual lefty?
Someone could write up a report for the Morning Star. Maybe Chris, you have a good.
Yes, indeed. I put the letter into the Morning Star that we drafted. It's not been published yet, but yeah, we could perhaps do a report.
Possibly a report for them. Maybe. maybe you could do a report of this
Yeah,
meeting.
no, indeed. Yeah, that might be useful. Yeah.
And the canary, you get on very well with Conway.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're
maybe
muted, Jackie, by the way. We can't hear you.
He's just speaking very quietly or hadn't said anything.
Speak up then. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. Yeah.
Okay, can I suggest as well that given that the EHRC report, so-called report, is going to be coming out next week, that have a very quick organisation discussion about a follow-up for this is quite important, and that perhaps we could use that as the next one. Anyway, I'm off now.
That's a very good idea. Yeah. I'm looking forward to
See you, Jackie. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie.
Very well chaired, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, excellently.
Really.
Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Bye, comrades.